So we are now recording, and please, if that bothers you, then we can't do much about it. We've asked in the chat if you can rename yourself. If you go to the chat screen, you can see how to do that, but just add in your location or your chapter. If you're not already involved in a CCL chapter, please send me an email, send us a text. Let us know. CCL it's an amazing organization. I've been involved with all sorts of nonprofits for a few years, not more than 40 or 50. But nonetheless, it's just totally remarkable. And one last thing, those of you who see me in other places and venues, you'll notice I generally wear a red shirt. And I wear a red shirt because we're in a climate emergency. So when you see me in a red shirt, just know that, yes, we have a climate emergency. It's just my own little reminder for things. And so I believe that now I will be introducing Jeff Joslin, who will introduce our first speaker. I assume Danny Richter is on. I hope so. And that he has the ability to share the slides. Great, thanks, Danny. Well, I'm gonna let Jeff introduce you. Jeff is a guy who, regular guy. He started a climate study group that got a few people, and then he converted it into a CCL chapter. And I've always been amazed and appreciative that he did so, and he's been doing work with OnGo to help us handle the stress of climate change. So Jeff, please introduce Danny Richter.
Hey, good morning, fellow CCLers. I'm glad to be here and honored to introduce Dr. Danny Richter, CCL's Vice President of Government Affairs. Danny got his doctorate in oceanography. What better way is there to protect the environment you love than to be a part of CCL? That's why Danny joined and committed his efforts to CCL. Danny was a volunteer for 5 years before joining the staff in 2013. He established CCL's DC office, does lots of research for CCL, but most importantly, Danny's a beacon of hope when it comes to the presentations he gives. That's why I love to hear him. I also want to mention that in 2 of the last 2 video presentations I've seen of him, his little girl Mira made unexpected guest appearances. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danny with the possibility of a surprise guest. Danny?
Well, thank you, Jeff, for that kind introduction. And yeah, it could be Mira, it could be Callum, who is my 1-year-old. So we'll see. He woke me up at just before 5 a.m. this morning. So we'll see how quick on my feet I am this morning with you all. But I am having a little bit of trouble getting my slides up. So I will start with my presentation. And maybe that'll load. Or actually, Jeff, do you have those slides ready? Are you able to share them?
Yeah, I think somebody else is prepared to do that, so we'll get them up for you, Danny.
All right, thank you very much. Well, let's get started. So what I want to talk to you about this morning, I'm going to take about 10 minutes to go over it. I'm going to talk about the current opportunity that we see, reconciliation versus regular order, the timeline that we're working with. Then I'm going to talk about carbon pricing within this opportunity, and then I'll bring us back to the international angle because we really do need a global view for a global problem. And then I'll bring it back with some conclusions. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So let's start with the current opportunity, reconciliation versus regular order. Actually, I'm seeing my slides up, so oh, Henry, you got it. Never mind.
Yeah.
So let's start with the current opportunity, reconciliation versus regular order. So the storyline in DC these days is really focused on reconciliation. This is slide 5, Henry. Thank you. The full name, of course, is budget reconciliation, and this is a technical opportunity that exists in Congress typically once per fiscal year and has been used periodically by both parties when they control both chambers of Congress and the presidency to pass their priorities. So for example, Democrats used it to pass important parts of Obamacare and Republicans used it to pass the Trump tax cuts. The reason why it's attractive is because, next slide please, It only requires 50 votes in the Senate. The trade-off for that lower vote threshold, as opposed to regular order, which would require 60 votes to get past the filibuster, is the Byrd Rule. And you see a little bit about that up here. The Byrd Rule limits the kinds of things that you can pass through budget reconciliation. It tends to be clunky and inelegant, the legislation that you pass. And it also tends to be very partisan because you're really only trying to do big things that weren't really designed for reconciliation when you have that control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So it tends to be very partisan. So because of that, Republicans are not super happy right now. And this is the second reconciliation package to be taken up this calendar year because last Congress didn't pass one in their fiscal year. So that's why we have two in this year. And that was a $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. And President Biden is trying to cram a lot into this second potential package. He wants it to be $3.5 trillion. Not all Democrats agree with that. But he does want climate to be one of the main things addressed in this reconciliation package. And so that's an opportunity. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the timeline that we're working with, because this is really important for understanding where we sit now as an organization. Next slide, please. We know a lot about what Democrats want to try and accomplish with this $3.5 trillion plan, but we only know about it in a very general way. This is because on August 9th, Senate leadership issued a memo outlining what priorities there were and which committees they expected to address them. So we know that the Clean Electricity Payments Program is going to be addressed by Senator Manchin's committee, Energy and Natural Resources. We know that Environment and Public Works was assigned the methane fee. We know that Finance was given very wide latitude. And we also know that nobody was assigned a carbon price at that time. I also want to address for a moment the House, because we are expecting a big House vote on Monday. This is the result of a compromise between moderate and progressive Democrats in the House. Speaker Pelosi said they would have a joint vote on both a reconciliation package and on the bipartisan infrastructure package, which passed the Senate earlier this year with 19 Republican votes. And she promised that on September 27th. September 27th is Monday. The House has been racing to get reconciliation into a form that it can actually be voted on. But the Senate version matters more. You can pretty safely ignore what's in the House version of reconciliation. And part of that is because they've put this together so quickly. Part of that is because of the Byrd Rule. The Byrd Rule actually only applies in the Senate, but anything that actually gets passed has to go through the Senate. And so House members, if they pass something early, they don't get a parliamentarian ruling on that. It's only the Senate parliamentarian. There's only a parliamentarian in the Senate. So by sticking with the timeline and very probably passing this on Monday, Speaker Pelosi is setting up the moderate Democrats for a tough vote, voting on something that includes more progressive policies and is probably good for them in their general election. Really the Senate version of reconciliation, which hasn't been reported out yet. We don't know what's in the Senate version of reconciliation. That has not been made public. It's still being made as the House is voting on theirs. So that's what's going on. That's some of the context. Later on, Leader Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, yes, next slide, that was perfect, thank you, did release more details to his plan, specifically on the climate provisions. And here you can see them. He had a plan which includes a clean electricity payments program, clean energy tax incentives, clean vehicle incentives, methane fees, and several other programs. But when you add up all the emissions reductions expected from these programs, according to Leader Schumer's own modeling, you don't get to the 50% emissions reduction that President Biden wants by 2030. So there are also really big concerns, even at this late stage, that the Clean Electricity Payments Program, which has the biggest chunk of emissions reductions, as you can see, is even going to be reconcilable. Those concerns have been dogging this program the entire year, and they still exist. So there is a concern. There is a concern. Democrats so far don't have what it takes to meet Biden's pledge in terms of emissions reductions. Then we have a Finance Committee leak on September 3rd. This was first leaked in Bloomberg. It was a document that was produced by Senate Finance Committee staff, and they are in fact considering a carbon price. So if you go back to the guidance that was issued for Senate Finance, they were given very wide latitude. They were given a nominal $1 billion to raise. And Finance Committee is the only committee that can actually raise money. All the other committees can only spend money. So giving them a nominal $1 billion when President Biden says he wants this to be paid for, $3.5 trillion, that's a lot of latitude. So Senate Finance basically gets to do what they want for the most part. So the fact that they're considering a carbon price is really, really encouraging. And the details of that document suggest they're considering a carbon price starting at $15 per ton of CO2, increasing over time. They considered three options for where to put that, either on fossil fuels at the source, process emissions like the CO2 that comes out of steel when you produce steel or when you produce cement, or a per barrel tax on barrels of oil. And then that would be paired with a border carbon adjustment. So that's really, really interesting. All of these options, all three of those options, this leaked document said would be paired with payments to low-income households and a border carbon adjustment, as I said. So what this looks like to me is they have a fee starting at $15, increasing gradually over time, returning the vast majority of the revenue to households, and they have a border adjustment. Sounds a little familiar. So this was a big plus. And then even more recently, this isn't a leak, but this is some modeling out of Resources for the Future, which is a very well-respected think tank in DC. So yeah, let's go to carbon pricing within the proposal. Let's go to that RFF study. The authors on this study were very interesting. There were 6 authors. Mark Hafstead he's been with RFF. He's done a lot on carbon pricing. One of the premier models that is used to look at carbon pricing is the Goulder-Hafstead model, and that typically has higher emissions reductions per dollar. But Mark Hafstead is the lead author on this. 2 of the other co-authors, Wesley Look and Kevin Rennert, they used to be Finance Committee staff for the current chairman, Ron Wyden. So here you have 2 staffers who 2-3 years ago were working for the chairman of the committee that has a nominal $1 billion to pay for this and to really make up the missing 5%. And if the CEPP is ruled not reconcilable, to probably also make up more than that 5%. And what did they find? Well, if you look at the details, let's go to the next slide, please. They presented this in a very confusing way, but they looked at the Clean Electricity Performance Program. They looked at the Clean Energy for America Act. This is a bunch of tax credit subsidies for businesses, and this is a package that Chairman Wyden authored himself, so he really likes that. They also considered 2 carbon price paths. The central carbon price path starts at $15 per ton in 2023. It rises to $30 per ton by 2028, so that's $1 in the first year, 2 in the second, 3 in the third, 4 in the fourth, 5 in the fifth, and then by $10 per ton after that through 2040. And then they considered 2 versions, one with being truly economy-wide, and 2, having an exemption for gasoline. So they consider this on its own, and then they consider it both with the Clean Energy for America Act, they consider it with the Clean Electricity Payments Program, and their alternative central price path starts at $15 per ton and then increases by 5% per ton per year without exemptions and with exemptions. And so when you look at that graph again, and you look at that alternative carbon price path, and you look closely, you will notice that it crosses the path of the CEPP plus CEAA right at 2030. And so they basically worked backward. What does our model say is the 2030 reductions for the subsidies and for the Clean Electricity Payment Program? Where do we start? Finance probably wants to start at $15, and what rate of increase gets us there? It's 5%. So that's how they arrived at that number. It's just exact equivalence for the 2030 emissions reductions for this, because that's Biden's goal. But it's also interesting that they're considering this central carbon price path. I love that they're calling it the central path. And they looked at it, when you pair that, that doesn't get you to Biden's goal either. But it gets you really close. It gets you to 45% if you're not exempting gasoline, and 44% if you are exempting gasoline, which is really interesting because I thought it would be more. But because people are so slow to buy cars, and because gasoline is the least affected of the fossil fuels by a carbon price because of how much people pay already, you only see a 1% drop. And the main message, the take-home message, is that when you put all of these things together, that's how you meet Biden's pledge. And you should bear in mind that this is ignoring some of the other provisions that were in Schumer's pie chart. This only considers 3 policies, the 2 that were in the biggest chunk, and a carbon fee, which wasn't in there. Basically, all those other things were not in here. So this is probably going to be conservative, but a carbon price plays well with others. And if you're interested in learning more about this or reading more about this, our new research coordinator, Danny Richter Ccl, he posted a blog on this, and it came out on Thursday. So if you go to the CCL blog, you can find more on this. So now let's move to the international angle, and we're closing in on questions here. Many of you may have heard me say this, but I'm going to revisit it anyway. The US is increasingly isolated in international climate circles. And that is because, next slide, please. There are only 2 economies that don't have a carbon price. 34 out of 36 developed economies already have a carbon price in place. And this seems shocking, but it is true. And we arrived at this just by looking at the UN list of developed economies, at the World Bank list of economies with the carbon price, and the US and Australia were the only exemptions. But Australia, next slide, please, they have something that's very similar. And let's look at the, I think, is that in the next slide? Well, what they have is they do have a nationwide price on fossil fuels, but instead of being based on the carbon atoms in the fuel, it's based on the offset price. So what price are people willing to pay to offset emissions from these fossil fuels? And so it's not technically a carbon price, it's an offset price. So that's why Australia is not counted by the World Bank as having a carbon price in place. So that means that we are the only developed economy without a nationwide price on fossil fuels. The vast majority of them have it based on the carbon content of that. And when we think about this, this is problematic for us because our largest trading partner, Canada, and the largest foreign market available to American companies, the European Union, they are considering carbon border adjustment mechanisms. Next slide, please. And this is, we had a great speaker for last month's speaker, Aaron Cosby, and he's really an expert on this. And he, I think, really made a great point. We're going to see a lot of individualism. It's going to be, every country is going to have their own particular carbon border adjustment mechanism for their own particular carbon price. And it's going to be really difficult to declare equivalence between these policies. You really, really, really need a domestic carbon price in order to relieve your companies of the administrative burdens of figuring out what they owe when they enter into a country with another carbon price. So if we don't get our act together with the rest of the developed world, American companies are going to be at a disadvantage with any country that already has a carbon price. Next slide, please. And so, what the EU, their carbon price has hit 60 euros this year, record high. In Canada, they're considering a $170 Canadian, that's about $130 US carbon price by 2030. Japan, which is also a top 10 economy, they are considering a similar carbon border adjustment mechanism. And we know from the WTO that carbon border adjustment mechanisms are legal with the WTO if they have an environmental purpose, if they're non-discriminatory, and they can be easily assessed. And that easily assessed, that's really the key to why you can't do this for, say, the offset price. The offset price is not equivalent to a price set by the carbon atoms in a fossil fuel. So Australia is also going to have trouble with this. They're going to have less trouble than us, I think, because we don't have any national carbon price, but they're still going to have trouble. So that's some about the border carbon adjustment. And so really the questions here, and let's remember that explicit carbon pricing remains a necessary condition of ambitious climate policies. This comes from the IPCC 2018 report on a 1.5 degree world. And so here's the question. We've been hearing from some Democrats that they really have a concern that if they do a carbon price, that they will that will have electoral consequences. They're looking at 1993 when the Clintons considered a BTU tax, and then they lost both the House and the Senate in the midterms. They're thinking about 2010 when President Obama considered a carbon price and then lost the House and the Senate in the midterms. And there are Democrats who think that, wow, if we do a carbon price, this will happen again. And what I think, the thing that I like to respond with people have these concerns is, can Biden or really any US president be seen as serious on climate if the United States continues not to have a carbon price? This includes a Republican president. If this is going to be a burden for businesses, and you're probably going to see a scenario where businesses are relocating jobs and production to other countries to avoid those administrative burdens internally, not at the border, but internally to figure out what their burden is. How can any president win re-election when that is their reality? And when they can avoid that fate by acting, by having a carbon price. So really, when we point this out, we really have those Democrats in mind who are resistant with pure political concerns, purely thinking about the next election and not thinking about the climate, not putting the climate first. That's where that comes from. So yes, let's go to conclusions. Reconciliation is the focus in today's Washington. That does make it difficult to talk to Republicans about reconciliation. Really, you need to talk to them about regular order bills. And so that's why we asked all liaisons for Republican members of the House to support the bipartisan infrastructure that already passed the Senate on Monday. It passed the Senate with 19 Republican votes, and we want our liaisons to ask their Republican House members to support it on Monday. Though a latecomer to the reconciliation discussion, carbon pricing is still very much a part of the debate because it both reduces emissions a lot and it raises revenue. It solves two of the Democrats' biggest problems. This could be the piece, carbon pricing, that brings Schumer's estimates in line with Biden's commitments. And right now, I think that it is really important for President Biden and therefore for Democrats to meet that 50% reduction by 2030. And it would also solve an international problem that will be a problem for any president, Democrat or Republican, moving forward due to the advent of those carbon border adjustment mechanisms, those CBAMs, and the likely job losses that would result should we continue to be the bad actor on climate on the global stage. So that's what I wanted to say. And now let's get to questions.
Danny, we already have one that President Biden says he won't raise taxes for those making over $400,000 a year. So is this why he's blocking the carbon tax?
President Biden is not blocking the carbon tax. He is open to it. He's nervous about it. I think he's certainly not pushing for it. He's a little bit on the sidelines, but it's wrong to think that he's blocking it. It's wrong to think that members of his administration, such as Gina McCarthy, who have not been excited about a carbon price, are blocking it. That is just inaccurate. It is accurate to think that the $400,000 pledge, not to raise taxes on those earning less than $400,000, that is a concern for President Biden. But I and Senate offices that I've been talking to, they remain confident that when you're spending $3.5 trillion, you can figure out a way to address that concern. It's probably not going to be completely paid for. And so you can figure a way to address that. And especially if you're doing dividends, I think that gets you a lot of the way there. I do know that we've heard that the Biden administration is also concerned about inflation and cost inflation. So I think that's probably part of why we're seeing that exemption for gasoline, because people, that's the first thing they think about. And so I've never heard this discussed before. That RFF study came out. but it is creative. That's the thing that people focus on. And so if that's only going to result in a 1 or 2% drop in your expected emissions reductions by 2030, but it's going to make the politics that much easier, I think I can live with that. I don't like it. I'd rather not have it, but I can live with that.
Danny, Scott has a question on how is Congress understanding how carbon price will be complementary to CEPP and other tax incentives?
Yeah, I think that it's scattered how well they understand that. I mean, it is complementary. The CEPP is only in the power sector, and really those tax incentives it depends on how you do it, but that's going to be some buildings and some yeah, no, you can get to transportation. So those can be longer, but for both those, there's a delay. And so whereas a carbon price, that acts very, very quickly, especially if it's a fear tax. You see year one emissions reductions in double digits. Even if you have a $30 carbon price, year one, you see, using that Golder Halfstead model, you see a 27% reduction below 2005 levels. We're already at 17% below 2005 levels. Notice how politicians are using our highest emissions year, really, so that you already start 17% down. That's a cool little political trick. But even when you subtract 17 from 27, that's still 10% reduction with a $30 carbon price in year one. And if you think about those subsidies, if you think about the Clean Electricity Payments Program with subsidies, you can have an investment tax credit. Those really help with investments, but first you need to make the money available, and then the companies need to make the investments, and then you need to have all the siting and the building and then the connection to the grid, all that stuff. It takes time. Same thing with the production tax credit. You don't get that until you start producing things. And so the only people who are going to be available to get those are those who already have renewables on the ground. It takes time. So it's going to take time for those. And I'm bringing this up because that's why they're complementary. If reducing emissions is our goal, not any of the political considerations, then by having a policy that works in year one with huge emissions reductions, then all those other policies, when they finally bite, they're working from a lower base. And your cumulative emissions, which is what really matters according to the IPCC, are going to be lower. So they really complement each other in terms of emissions reductions because carbon price works year one, big emissions reductions. These other policies take a bit to kick in, but they really do complement it, particularly if you have the subsidies for like an EV tax credit that are targeted at the transportation sector. You know, that's always going to be complementary to a carbon price. As I mentioned, it's always been clear that transportation is the least affected industry. That is especially true if you are exempting gasoline from your carbon price, which again, I don't love, but if that's what it takes to get it passed, it makes sense to me. I can live with that.
Hey, Danny, Jerry asks something kind of along those lines. Do we have evidence that carbon pricing in Canada and other countries having an effect?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of evidence. There's a long history of, I mean, some of these countries have had carbon pricing for a couple of decades. There are concerns about the price level. So if you just have a carbon price, but the price is too low, you don't see any effect. We know this. If you have a carbon price, we saw this in BC, and you don't continue to increase it, it has an effect until you stop increasing it. BC is British Columbia, and then it stops really having a noticeable effect. And so that's why you need to have that continual ratcheting up of the pressure over time to get these, and you need to pass a certain threshold where you reach those trade-offs, where it makes more sense to invest in lower carbon alternatives long term. And so right now, with that $60 carbon price in Europe, let's talk about Europe, because they've had this EU ETS for 16 years. They first inputted it in 2005. When I was visiting the EU with as an ambassador to figure out what other countries were doing from the US, this was with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. I think I wrote some blogs about it at the time. The question that these EU energy experts were posing to us is, why was anybody paying anything for the emissions credits. This is 9 years after implementation, and the carbon price was $5. And they're like, why? There's plenty of credits, so why are people paying anything? There's a glut of credits. They fixed that. Now it's 60 euros. And not only are you seeing businesses plan in Europe for a lower carbon future and make really significant decisions, but you're even seeing other countries do this. Earlier this year, you saw the Russian Duma pass a carbon price in the first reading. I don't know if they put it in place yet, but they were considering an emissions trading system, and they cited the fact that they expected to lose $8 billion a year to the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism as a reason why they're doing this. China, who has had a carbon price for a while, but they expanded it to more sectors of their economy. And right now, the news is that they are having the same problems that the Europeans had for over a decade with a really low carbon price. And so it's not really doing anything in China. But do I think that this is bad acting on the Chinese? No, just as I don't think that the Europeans were being bad actors for over a decade. I think that they really wanted to reduce emissions reductions. It's just harder to do when you have a cap and trade system. And so we're seeing other countries, you see the reaction from other countries to the EU ETS at these price points. It is having an effect today. And it's having an effect even outside those borders. Companies that are not now subject to that carbon price, even they are reacting. So yes, there's a lot of evidence that these carbon prices in other countries do have an effect.
Emily has a question. Any insight into Georgia specifically and how we can help make carbon pricing popular here?
Yeah, I think that Georgia is one of the most interesting states in the union right now. Of course, because you had that. You flipped in the last election. You gave the Senate to Chuck Schumer, and so I expect there's some Republicans on this call, and you're probably not happy with that. And I hope you can at least appreciate the that does make you a state of attention, and that's fine. But the dynamics right now, I think for Warnock, for Ossoff, they're both new in the Senate. I think they're trying to figure out their way, and they are going to be asked to take a vote on a carbon price. It looks increasingly likely. We got a very high probability from Finance Committee members very recently that this will be in there, and so I think that showing support from people in their states who are important to the election of these two senators. I think that will be helpful to them. I think it will be even more helpful if their potential opponents in their next re-election bid are also talking about a carbon price. So I think it remains, I want a carbon price. I want climate in general to be depoliticized. I think that anything you can do to depoliticize climate is going to be good. And this is, so that's why I was so excited about the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which we put a lot of effort into, which passed 92-8 in the Senate. I mean, it's just, you had some of the most liberal Democrats and some of the most conservative Republicans voting against it. That was it. It has climate solutions in the title. I mean, this is a huge shift in what Republicans are willing to vote for. And so I think that that's really, really helpful, continuing to do that and recognizing that there are environmental groups who want just the opposite. They are comfortable with climate being a partisan issue. They want to use it to beat up on Republicans. We don't want that. And so recognizing that when we around the country, including in Georgia, are talking about carbon pricing or talking about the climate and trying to make it a depoliticized issue, there will be resistance from other environmental groups, and that's okay because they are putting politics above physics. And just prepare yourself for that. So that's my advice to Georgia.
Thank you. I think we're out of time for questions at this point, but thank you.
We are.
All right,
we're gonna jump to breakout rooms if we're ready, Salemi. You should see a note on your screen says hit the button to join the breakout room. So as it says, please share something from your breakout room into the chat so we can all learn from your group. And I'm going to ask our chat monitors to start reading some of these comments.
Sure. So over the next week, should we get our members to write president or contact senators? I would say that would be yes. Bob writes, do we highlight 1 or 2 industrialized countries that does not have a carbon price or a cap and trade? We're further along than we thought, says Jeff. Katie says, main message, keep on keeping on. More important to con out White House or senators, ? Bill has gotten replies from each, try both, probably equally important. Encourage that other groups are pushing their members to do climate lobbying with Congress. Hello from Augusta, said Alicia. We are having a watch party. It's and then it says, Kathy says, we talked about how powerful the carbon border adjustment will be in conversation with leaders. Economics matters. We talked about, Christina says, we talked about leaving out the carbon tax from gasoline prices. I think we are going all pro not raising the price of gas. Let's see, Sarah says, helpful to get sustainability-centered business to speak out on the CBAMs and to help educate public and depoliticize carbon pricing. Terry says, there's so much to learn, situation is complicated.
Susan notes that the US will be left out economically without carbon price, and we can't have the price too low. And Alicia said what Susan said.
Yeah, we're going to be left out without carbon. Jury says, New York Times article with this AM quote, Steve Volk said that there were 1,444 calls to Arizona senators backing carbon price.
That's tremendous. Thank y'all so much. It's time to move on to our next speaker. But, oh, I'm sorry. It's time for a break. So dance a little or stretch a little bit. Remember, coffee's in the kitchen, bathrooms down the hall. This will be just a 5-minute break. So do not be late coming back or you'll miss some of Bob Inglis. Well, Terry, why don't you go ahead and introduce Bob Inglis?
Terry, you're on mute.
Okay, so I am pleased to introduce Bob Inglis. And if you've been in CCL for even a relatively short time, Bob's name will be familiar to you. Not only is he a member of the CCL Advisory Board, which is of course important to us, he has also been a frequent speaker and contributor to many CCL events and conferences. I first saw him speak to a CCL conference just like this one, except it was face-to-face back in, I think, 2014. He is best known to us as a conservative who has taken the climate change problem seriously in spite of the political winds that were blowing against him at the time. He is currently executive director of an organization called Republic N, which puts a conservative slant or spin on climate change action. On its website, it says it was created to encourage, embolden, and applaud conservative climate leadership. He was given the 2015 John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award. He has appeared in the film Merchants of Doubt and in the climate series Years of Living Dangerously. He grew up in the low country of South Carolina, went to Duke University, married his college sweetheart, attended and graduated from the University of Virginia Law School, and has practiced commercial real estate in Greenville, South Carolina for many, many years around the times he was in Congress. And he and his wife have 5 adult children, live on a small farm in northern Greenville County, South Carolina. And Bob, it's a delight to have you here. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Terry. Wonderful to be with you. Thank you all for what you're doing. You know, CCL has this wonderful ability to gather people and to give them information and give them the courage to go speak with their members of Congress. And so what a great thing that you're accomplishing. And so I'm excited to be, as Terry said, on the CCE board actually as well, Citizens Climate Education, the 501c3 that supports CCL. And so I was thinking about what I should say to you here today. First of all, I guess I should, just in case you, unlike Terry, have not heard how I got to this, I think I need to explain first how it is that conservative got involved in climate, because it seems unlikely, doesn't it? I mean, after all, it's clearly a liberal cause. Well, actually not, but but it does merit some explanation. And then second, tell you about some encouraging signs that I see. And then third, open up your questions and comments. So that first thing, how I got to this, you know, I was 6 years in Congress saying that climate change was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. And as much as I represented a very conservative district, Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina, that was the end of the inquiry. Okay, so I admit that's pretty ignorant, but that's the way it was for my first 6 years in Congress. Then I was out of Congress for 6 years doing commercial real estate law again, as Terry just said. And I had the opportunity to run for the same seat again in 2004. That was the year that my son, the eldest of our 5 kids, just turned 18. So he was voting for the first time. And he came to me, he said, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." His 4 sisters agreed, his mother agreed. That's a new constituency. You know, these people can change the locks on the doors to your house. You need to respond to that constituency. So that was step 1 of a 3-step metamorphosis. And by the way, my son was going to vote for me no matter what, right? I mean, he knew that it wasn't in his economic interest to vote against me, because you can always lose by 1 vote. And so he knew that we were mortgaging the farmette that we live on, literally, in order to run for Congress. And so he was going to vote for me. I think what he was really saying was, "Dad, I love you. You can be better than you were before. So how about make this Inglis 2.0, the new and improved version?" And so that was step 1. Step 2 is going to Antarctica, seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. We can go into that in the Q&A time if you want to. Third step was another science committee trip and something of a spiritual awakening, which seems unlikely, doesn't it? I mean, on a godless science committee trip, because we all know that all scientists are godless, right? Well, apparently not, because this Australian climate scientist who I was snorkeling with, I could tell was worshiping God in what he was showing me. You know, St. Francis of Assisi said, "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." And so Scott Heron, who's now become a very dear friend, was clearly preaching the gospel. It was in his eyes, it was written all over his face, it was in the excitement in his voice. As we'd go down, he'd come up to the surface and he'd tell me what he'd just shown me down below. And so I knew we shared a worldview without any words. Later, we had a chance to talk, and he told me about conservation changes he was making in his life in order to love God and love people. He rides his bike to work, does without air conditioning in Townsville, Australia. That's a pretty hot place. Hangs the family's clothes out on the line, all to consciously love people coming after us. So I got right inspired. I wanted to be like Scott, loving God and loving people. So I came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. That's a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax. Note to self, do not introduce carbon tax, even though it's revenue neutral and border adjustable. When you represent one of the reddest districts in the reddest state of the nation in the midst of the Great Recession. It will not go well. And it did not go well at all. After 12 years in Congress, I got 29% of the vote in a Republican runoff. The other guy got the other 71%. And so that was a rather spectacular faceplant in politics. Usually you don't end up with 29% after 12 years in office. So at that point, this foundation came to me and said, Inglis, you're pretty unusual, an actual conservative, 93 American Conservative Union rating, 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the Americans for Democratic Action, that's a liberal group, and 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO, the labor union. I was really hoping for a 0. So they said, an actual conservative who says climate change is real. Were you speaking right for the proposition? So that's what I'm doing ever since. It's now republicen.org. It's a team of 6 of us facilitating a community of about 11,000. We need that to have a 0 on the end of it, maybe 2 zeros. Necessitates probably a 0 or 2 on the end of our budget. And so we've got a ways to go. So we're that's what I've been doing ever since, and that's why I'm so excited about having compatriots like you who are so committed to getting action on climate change. So that's how I got to this. And then second thing I thought I'd do is just give you some encouragement that I find here lately. And of course, I'm going to mention first the discussions with Senator Wyden about the possibility of a carbon tax being in the reconciliation package. And my excitement, my encouragement there is bridled a bit because, I think that what President Biden said yesterday is pretty accurate, which is it's sort of stuck. I mean, how are they going to get to 51 on that $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill is pretty difficult. There are also some barriers with the Senate parliamentarian. I wonder, for example, whether the clean electricity program plan is going to be tossed out by the parliamentarian. And so it may be at that point, if they're really talking about climate, that it may help us a bit, because it may be then they really do need a carbon tax, because a carbon tax would fit within reconciliation. It'd be pretty strong fit, because you've got to affect the budget. You've got to, this would have a financial impact. It would get the ability to really have some maneuvering room within the parliamentary rules about reconciliation. So I'm encouraged by that. It's just what I'm aware of, though, is 51 is hard to get to when you're counting on Joe Manchin, for example, and Kristen Sinema. Although Sinema, in a strange sort of way, I read an article yesterday that I think is accurate, that she may actually be the key to this, because by her resistance to an increase in the corporate tax rate, because of her political considerations in Arizona, she may actually force them to look for revenue elsewhere. And that could be the carbon tax. So in a strange sort of way, she may be helping us. Joe Manchin, not so much. So I think he's just adamantly opposed. The question is whether somebody like Mitt Romney or Mike Braun would step forward, or Lisa Murkowski would step forward and be that extra vote that could break ranks and make it, take it over the top. So there's some very small chance of that, I think, because of the rest of what's in that reconciliation package. I mean, even if Mitt Romney were interested in, and I think he is, and I think Mike Braun is interested in a carbon tax, because both of them are Harvard MBAs. Both of them know that's the best way to solve this. Both of them understand the economics of it. They have a political challenge, but they also is a substantive challenge. And I hope that if I'm speaking to some progressives on this call, I just hope you understand that a lot of what's in the 3.5 trillion, way beyond climate, it's way into some other stuff that really conservatives just cannot cotton to. It's just really hard. So even if Lisa Murkowski, for example, who's committed to climate action, oddly, while she's trying to open up Anwar for more drilling. Okay, so I admit that's sort of an odd combination of things. Even if she were really charged up on climate, the other stuff within that reconciliation package is just too much to swallow. So could be reconciliation. That may be somewhat encouraging, I hope. But here's probably the more encouraging thing that I've come across recently, which is the news that Russia maybe is considering a carbon tax in response to the EU's carbon border adjustment, because they send an awful lot of natural gas, getting ready to send a lot more to Europe, and they'd pay a European tax on entry of that stuff into the EU that they could have collected at home, in which case that natural gas would flow into Europe without filling European coffers. It would fill Russian coffers, the Russian government. And so I'm sort of thinking that if a murderous organized crime syndicate that is Russia could decide to support a carbon tax out of their self-interest, maybe there's a chance of the US Senate coming to the same conclusion. What do you think? I mean, maybe, and by the way, I was on Foreign Affairs Committee as well as Science and some other committees I was on over my times, but Foreign Affairs, we used to say that the way to understand Russia, it's not a country. It is an organized crime syndicate. So the only problem is they've got nuclear weapons. So the organized crime syndicate isn't just, your money or your kneecaps. It could be, your money, or we blow up your city. So anyway, shouldn't laugh about that. It's really pretty tragic, actually. But the point is, hey, Russia got the memo. And what a great move by the EU. It's what we at CCL, we at republican.org, all of us have been saying all along. You do the border adjustment right, and that carbon tax becomes very attractive to anybody importing into your country. And so what a thing that Russia recognizes that. You think China would get the memo? I think they'd get it instantly. I mean, here's all this stuff coming to our Walmart shelves. Fine, go ahead and send it. It's just going to pay an American carbon tax on entry. Oh, you don't like that? Well, sue us in the WTO. Lose, because you will lose based on precedents in the chemical industry that say you can have a content tax. This would be a content tax. It's a carbon content tax. Then, now what you're going to do that you've lost, China? Well, 24 hours later, because they do have an amazing way of reaching consensus, don't they, in China? Not a very fair government, doggone efficient though, aren't they? They'd have the same carbon tax because they're paying a tax on entry to American ports that are benefiting the American government. They could have collected that at home and it would have filled their coffers. So 24 hours later, after losing the WTO, they get the same price on carbon dioxide. Then the whole world is following. And so I just, the last encouragement I offer, is the financial crisis. Somebody said, it's amazing how the impossible went to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. That was Secretary Paulson asking for $800 billion on like a page and a half bill. I mean, it was like the most, literally, it was like a page and a half, and he wanted $800 billion. And remember, on like a Thursday, it went down. Stock market dropped 800 points. We came back and re-voted it on Monday or Tuesday and passed it. So it really was that the impossible went to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. And I think what I've just described with that carbon border adjustment is the leverage by which the impossible goes to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. And so it's encouraging to me that, like I say, Russia got it. So that tells me that other people can get it too. Hopefully soon, the US House and Senate will get it. With your help, we can get there. So I've told you how I got to this, just in case some of you didn't know that. I told you about some of the encouraging things that I see, the reconciliation package, the Russia message, and then this really the inevitability of this. And now let me see what your questions and comments are, realizing that you've got things to do at 11:30, and so do I. So what do you want to know? There might be questions in the chat. Terry, do you want to ask those, or how you want to do that?
We've got some folks monitoring the chat, and I think some are in there already. So I think that's Scott and Terry are doing that now. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for being here, Mr. Inglis. It's really an honor. The first question we had, do you think Republicans would be more likely to support heavy spending, rebates, incentives to address climate change or revenue neutral carbon pricing?
I think that the conservative inclination is probably to do incentives right now, because it sort of hides the impact of a carbon tax. It's the same thing. It's just an inefficient way of getting there. So it's like this, there are three ways to address climate change. You can regulate emissions, you can incentivize clean energy, or you can tax the negative externalities, the negative effects of burning fossil fuels. And so obviously we at republican.org and CCL favor the third one. The first one, by the way, if you could just think about the regulatory approach, the problem with it is you can't regulate Chinese emissions. And so, yes, you can regulate here and you can improve local air, and that's all a good thing because there'll be fewer asthma cases because of, dealing with climate change here will also reduce small particulates probably. And so there'll be some very nice effects locally. But when that manufacturer here picks up and moves from here to there because they're not regulated there, they're going to emit more there than they were emitting here. So you've actually gone downhill on solving climate change. So the problem with the regulatory approach is really, it just doesn't work to solving climate change. Then the second approach is, incentivize clean energy. And this, in answer to the question, is where a lot of Republicans will end up. And frankly, if I were still in Congress, I'd be voting for some of these incentives, better solar credits and exemptions for various things, deductions for other stuff. Those are the ways that you can affect the bottom line of taxpayers, corporate taxpayers in America, and you can incentivize them that way. Challenge is the same, though, as the regulatory approach, and that is you can't incentivize Chinese corporations. They don't pay American taxes. So you can lead American companies around by the nose by giving them incentives, deductions, and credits, subsidies, but you can't incentivize other countries of the world. And so, again, you're solving local problem of cleaning up the air with clean energy. It's great, but you're not solving the problem of climate change until you get the whole world in it. And that leads you to the third with pricing in the negative effects, adding a carbon border adjustment, and then you've got the world in. So, but in the meantime, yes, I think Republicans will be talking a lot about incentives because it's a little bit of sugar that helps the medicine go down.
Next question was, if one is a liberal talking about carbon price to a conservative, what do you suggest toning down and what should be amplified in terms of points to highlight?
Yeah, great question. Here's the thing: is the premise of the question is right, and that is that we learn from people who like us, and we especially learn from people who are like us. So if you're a liberal reaching out to a conservative, you can pass that first test, right? You can like them. You can actually, try to respect them, try to, just like them, which is really the strength of CCL, I would say. It's amazing how CCL pulls that off. Not pulls it off as in faking it. I think it's actually for real. And so it's sort of like that famous Ellie Sparks, right? Ellie Sparks saying to Eric Cantor, Eric, don't leave Congress without acting on climate change. Now, what was in that? When Ellie said that to Eric, what Eric had to hear, even though Eric, got tossed out in the Republican primary, you feed the crocodile comes to get you is the moral of that story. But anyway, but what Ellie was saying to Eric was, I don't hate you. In fact, Ellie is this wonderful person sending love notes to everybody. And so what Eric heard was, you should like me and you want me to succeed. And that's really the right way to be. That is the DNA of CCL, set very well by my friend Marshall Saunders, who that's just who Marshall was. And so organizations develop DNA early on, I'm convinced, and CCL got it straight from its founder. And that's why Ellie spoke that way to Eric. And so the first thing is, in speaking, if you're a progressive and you're speaking to a conservative, try to find something to like about them, and understand that they just see the world differently. But then the other thing is, if you can, find a conservative to go with you, because that person is probably going to learn really from that person who is like them, because then, but mostly remain authentic. If I'm going to speak to an Orthodox Jewish congregation, I probably should not say to them, hey, bros, just like you. No, Inglis, we could tell at the door you're not. That would be wrong for me to do that. Better for me to say, I'm not like you, but I respect you. That's why I'm here. And so now let's talk, right? In other words, you got to come with authenticity. If you're progressive, don't try to fake it and be a conservative for the day. Just go ahead and say you're progressive, but do it like Ellie did and actually, reach out in love to Eric Cantor and sort of call him to a higher purpose. Realize that's hard in some cases, particularly talking in Georgia, and there's a Marjorie Taylor Greene. Good luck if you, I don't know, whoever's got her, bless you. Oh, bless your heart is all I got to say on that. And maybe that's all you can say to her is bless your heart.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I think you may be getting a lot of requests to be a person going with someone to a meeting with a member of Congress. Another question we had was, how do we motivate young Republicans who are generally more eco-right to help change other, perhaps older Republicans?
Yeah, you're really onto something there. That's the ambassadorial role of young conservatives to their parents and grandparents. We think that's a real thing. And as my friend Catherine Hayhoe says, just get them to talk. That's the thing that people can do. If you just talk about it, go ahead and tell your parents and grandparents, encourage that young conservative to have the conversation with them. I do acknowledge that it's sort of like this, Johnny comes home from college. Mom, Dad, I got two things to tell you. One, I'm gay. Second, I believe in climate change. What, Johnny? We didn't raise Al Gore in this household. We cannot deal with that second thing. What about the first thing? Oh, don't worry about that, Johnny. But that second thing, completely unacceptable. Okay, that's the way it's been for a while, but I think it's changing now because what's happening is people are realizing that, the water is coming up. Anybody here on the coast on this call, the water is coming up. When you can't get to Tybee certain times, you don't want to drive your brand new Lexus through salt water. You know what happens to salt water, to a car that gets salt water in it? Same thing that happens to an outboard motor. I grew up at the coast, and the terror was that the outboard motor would ever get in the salt water, because if it did, it's done. You may as well junk it, because salt water is corrosive. And so, yeah, the water is coming up. And even though that may have been true at one point about Johnny, we can't take that second thing. It's now becoming more clear to Grandpa and to Mom and Dad, if they're on Tybee, for example, that it's real. And so they're looking for an answer, and the ambassadorial role becomes easier.
Okay. Well, I think we have time for maybe one more question. And this one is, media prefers to amplify conflict. How do we get attention to compromise and working together in that kind of environment?
I have no idea. And I tell you what, I think that, let me see. I think you just don't worry about it, because this is a note from Marshall Saunders. To me, let's see, as I was losing the House seat, Marshall wrote this note. He's quoting Lord Krishna. He says, if you want to give your best in any selfless service, choose the right goal, use the right means, and don't think about the results. Leave them to me. I think that's what you got to do, because it's a great question. It's a reality that we face. It's a reality we face at republican.org. Even though we message on the right, I just don't like attacking Joe Biden or attacking AOC, it's just not, it's a cheap shot, and yes, it'll get you on Fox. But what do you get at the end of the day? You get more hatred. You get more animosity. You get more estrangement. You get more polarization. And so I think that the real hope, and this is what, I keep this note obviously handy from Marshall. It's amazing. I got through that without cracking up. But just choose the right goal, use the right means, and don't think about the results. Leave that to me. For any Christian or Jew or Muslim, it all sounds the same. Really, just choose the right goal, use the right means, and leave the results to God. And that's what you got to do. And so I think that ultimately we'll be successful, because eventually people will come to understand that what Ellie was doing with Eric is the right way to do it. And that, but I just urge you to persevere in that, because that's the DNA Marshall gave CCL. So stick with it, and it's the right way to go, because ultimately we'll win. And let the headline grabbers and the clickbait people succeed, and just carry on with what you're doing. Give me an amen. I'll stop preaching. We'll pass the hat if we could. Okay. Can we pass the hat too? There's a donate button. Just kidding. It's just
okay.
So
anyway, we didn't think of that, Bob.
Yeah, but so I'm at the point where y'all need to move on to other things. So thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob.
Good to be with you. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we're going to go right on into the next presentation. And as part of it, Kathy and Laura, our presenters, are actually going to circle back to communicating with conservatives, in this case, using the En-ROADS climate simulator. I just want to mention quickly and say a few words about your presenters. Kathy Gowland is currently the group leader for the Gwinnett chapter, and I've been working with her for several years now. They've gone by quickly, and it's a pleasure to work with her. She's a retired teacher, and it comes through in everything she does. And I really appreciate knowing her and working with her. And Laura, I've actually only met recently. She actually joined a team of us who were putting together presentations for the Georgia Climate Conference that happened in August. And we had a poster on En-ROADS that I wasn't able to travel to go, but Laura and Kathy went, along with Ken Kirby, and I think Scott Presson went as well. We had and Bob O'Brien. We had a great representation there. But I'm going to especially just say that Laura has been so helpful in getting this conference together and teaching us how to use polling software and stuff like that. So both of these people are just a critical part of Georgia's CCL's effort, and I'm just glad to be able to work with them. And I'm going to turn it over first to Kathy, who's going to give the first half of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Terry, and all of the speakers today. This has been a wonderful time to get together, and I've just learned so much already. And we are going to begin our presentation as soon as I can share this. There we go. Welcome to our session using En-ROADS, MIT Global Interactive Climate Action Simulator. This is just going to be a brief overview, and there are many resources. You can see these web links on the page. And as Laura and I are big En-ROADS fans, we are always happy to talk to you anytime after the presentation, and we hope that you'll dig in further to these resources. First, let's take a look and see how familiar you are with En-ROADS. So we're going to do a quick poll EV, and if you still have that open, just go in and check and see which of these descriptors fits you the best. And while you are doing that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself with a short story. I am Kathy Gowland, as Terry said, and many of you, like many of you, I have been concerned about climate change for a long time. And when a group of us in our chapter first found out about En-ROADS a few years ago and started working with it, it made me see for the first time, I think, why CCL's main goal of getting climate change, getting carbon fee enacted in legislation is absolutely and tangibly the best first step we can take as an organization. So I think that En-ROADS is a powerful tool, and I'm glad to be here to share it with you. And as Danny said earlier today, we need a global view for a global problem. So here we're going to go with an overview. What is En-ROADS? How can it be used? And then if we have a little bit of time, I'm going to share a little bit about multi-solving, what it is and how it can help. And then Laura is going to tell you how using En-ROADS can show that carbon pricing is good for business. The En-ROADS simulator is, we're going to go to that in just a minute. And it's an acronym: Energy Rapid Overview and Decision Support. And that always helps me remember and concentrate on what it's used for and what the purpose is. And Andrew Jones is fond of saying research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So we're going to jump right into the active simulator. You'll come to this screen and you just read this and close it. And then the first step I'm going to take is to go to this right graph and change this to a net greenhouse emissions gas by area, I think that's just a little more informative for what we're going to be doing today. And our main goal is, you can see over here on the right, that currently we're at 3.6 degrees trajectory to reach by the end of this century. Our goal is to bring that down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we're going to do that by taking actions down here. Let's start with energy efficiency. That's a good one to start with. And you can see immediately how much that brings down both the global primary sources of energy on the left and the net greenhouse gas emissions on the right. So let's do the same thing with transportation. Just making more efficient use of transportation, higher mileage, things like that. And you can still see that that has brought us down, but we have a lot of gray CO2 still left. So we're going to go into a carbon price and set a pretty hefty price, but it won't be an increasing price of $150 a ton. And you can see immediately how much that brings down these emissions of CO2. So this is again why carbon pricing is so effective. But I still see that we have a good bit of, now that we've cleaned up the grid a little bit, let's go ahead and electrify transportation. That's already starting to happen, but we're going to need a lot more. And then electrify building and industry also. And we can see that we're down at 2.3. And I still see a lot of blue here. And that stands for methane. So let's go under methane and other, and we'll reduce methane emissions. Let's start feeding cows some seaweed, and let's be careful about landfills, and let's capture gas leaving from exploration of natural gas. Okay, in the interest of time, we are down a good bit, but let me jump to a success scenario that I created earlier and show you that we've added additional levers of deforestation and then technological carbon removal and afforestation, and we have reached a temperature by the end of the century of an added 1.5 degrees. And you can see in this graph that we're drawing down as much or more than what we're producing at that point. So that is what I call a success scenario. And what's new in En-ROADS, we have some new climate impact graphs. And this came about because a lot of people were writing to Climate Interactive, the producers of En-ROADS, and asking them for these because it really helps explain what's going on and what we need to do. We're going to take each of these graphs individually and talk a little bit about them. But first, I'm going to show you how to get there. You would go to graphs in the top menu bar, pull down and go to impacts. And then you can see sea level rise. That was already in this simulator, but they've added population exposed to sea level rise, and then also these four additional graphs. You can also get to these graphs by clicking on the gray bars at the top of either graph side. This graph, population exposed to sea level rise, has two metrics in it. One, the people that are at risk of annual flooding, and people that are living below the high tide line. So they could potentially be flooded once or twice a day. So obviously that's not going to work, and they need to move or somehow some other way mitigate it. If we look over at the left graph, I've changed that to sea level rise. And you can see that the trajectory of both of these lines, the baseline and the change scenario, are still going upward a good bit. So that shows us that sea level rise is going to continue well into the next century. And these lines don't really start to diverge until about 2060. And so it's going to take a long time because there's so much heat already in the climate system to change the trajectory of sea level rise. And global population is also increasing. So that means that climate refugees are going to become more common, especially in areas where there are low-lying areas with maybe high population density, such as New Orleans, where a lot of people could also be low income and not able to take mitigation measures on their own. So mitigation strategies are going to be increasingly important. The second new graph that they put in En-ROADS is the probability of an ice-free summer. And there are 3 snapshots in time. the ice-free summer in 2050, the probability in 2100, and the probability of having it happen at least once by 2100. So you can see that unlike sea level rise, we've changed to temperature graph here. And as the temperature stabilizes, that's a big effect on the probability of an Arctic ice-free summer because that's very responsive to temperature. And the implications here are that darker water absorbs much more solar energy than the white ice cover. So that would further warm Earth, and Arctic is already warming faster than other areas. And these ice-free conditions would also be negative for indigenous lives, disrupting their lives, and then also animal habitat and migration. And actually the continuing feedback loop of additional warming is disrupting the polar vortex and the jet stream and making it increasingly likely that we'll have extreme weather events in the mid latitudes, such as the Texas ice storms last winter. The third new graph is decrease in crop yield from temperature. And you can see that these 4 crops are the ones that they're considering. And maize and wheat especially are subject to this decrease from temperature. And you can see that this little gray line all the way down here is showing you how much we've already lost in terms of the ability to grow crops in these regions. And currently these 4 crops make up about 2/3 of our world's caloric intake. So important resilient strategies here, and sustainability in agriculture is very important in this case. For these last 2 slides, I have changed to a different view. So it's still, these are the actual graphs. This is the same graph, but represented by a 2.0 and a 1.5 scenario. And you can see that the temperature change between 2.0 and 1.5 makes a big difference, almost 3 times more impactful in a 2.0, or more than 3 times more impactful in a 2.0 scenario versus a 1.5 success scenario. And again, we're already seeing plants and mammals experiencing this loss, particularly because they find it harder to migrate and to adapt to new environments. And when you think about scientists talking about every 10th or every small fraction of a degree helps, this is a perfect example of what you could show to point that out. And this is another very kind of upsetting graph. It's a very somber graph because it's talking about the additional deaths from heat and extreme heat. And again, the 2.0 setting and the 1.5 degree setting. And you can see also that we've already experienced many additional deaths from extreme heat in all of these regions. And you might notice that there are some regions that are not shown in this graph. In Asia, and in Africa and the Middle East, they didn't have enough data in the study that they used to include those here, but there is another graph that I'll show you how to access now. We're going back to the live simulator for just a minute. And if you want to, if you click on these 3 dots right here, you can see that you can view this screen larger. And so there are additional entries here of Central Europe, Northern Europe, Central America, and North America. And again, in all of these scenarios, you can see that the black baseline is much greater than the blue, and this is in the 1.5 scenario, than the blue success scenario. You can also go back and do this for the graph on species that have been lost, and they do add a few other species to see in this view larger. So they include butterflies and moths and dragons and damselflies, and then also the category of vertebrates is included in this graph when it's not in the smaller graph. Okay, so let me go back to the presentation. So I like to use these graphs to kind of talk about some possible baseline futures. In this graph, you see population by region. This is also one of the newer graphs in En-ROADS, and it shows clearly that it's expected that growth will happen in other developing countries. So not US, not Europe, not China, not India. And you can see the US is fairly stable and fairly low down here. A lot of developing countries will grow the fastest. And along with that growth is expected to come a lot of greenhouse gas net emissions. And so we are looking at a lot of rise in this scenario if we don't do something to mitigate it. Also, economists and policymakers and business leaders are starting to be increasingly concerned about the rise in temperature and the climate change havoc that that's wreaking. So there have been several studies lately that show that a reduction in GDP is also going to happen because of temperature rise. This particular one looks like it's an outlier. However, if you look at some people strongly believe in that nevertheless, but it looks like we could take an average expected reduction in GDP of about 20% by the end of the century if we don't do something to mitigate it. And then I kind of like this graph because it's talking about GDP per capita growth. And it looks like it might be smooth sailing here with about 1.5% going in the future. However, if you look closely and see the years that these two jagged events happened, 2008, obviously the financial crisis, and 2020, the pandemic that we're still in. So the point here is that things have in the past and will continue to upset this growth. But in a hopeful, resilient world in the future, we have the marginal cost of electricity has taken into consideration all of the costs of producing electricity. So fossil fuels are more expensive and therefore renewables are more widely used. Renewables and nuclear and hydro are better for the environment because they're non-emitting. And here you can see again that our greenhouse gases are way down in terms of emissions, but also that we're drawing them down. So that helps the climate and air quality, et cetera, health, and all kinds of other good impacts. Temperature change looks like it went a little bit above 1.5 degrees, but it settles down by, and it depends on the scenario, by the end of the century and hopefully stays stable afterwards. And with that stability, we can see that GDP continues to rise by region. Here, the US is in a place to continue being a world leader. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about multi-solving, just because I feel like this is a mindset that En-ROADers and CCLers share. We are finding solutions rooted in justice that produce co-benefits in health and resilience. And there are a database of projects that they have on the Climate Interactive website that are just really good jumping off points for anyone considering working in community, kinds of more local actions that you can take. Multi-solving, Elizabeth Solin describes a soul-searching moment when she and the Climate Interactive team realized that counting carbon wasn't getting them on the path they needed to be on. So they started to ask a different question. What else would be different in a world that had gotten off of fossil fuels? And she says, by expanding that view, they realized what they were missing. And basically that was the political will and the budgetary power they needed to make these big changes. So multi-solving envisions the world that we want to see versus the one that we think we have to settle for. And then it asks, how can we get there? Uh-oh, sorry. Okay. So this is a slide that many CCLers will be an example of. And I'm sorry that the other part didn't show up because I was showing the PM 2.5 and the PM 2.5 after the 1.5 degree scenario. So you can see there's a big health improvement. If you burn less coal, then it's going to improve health quality in the short term and also protect the climate in the long term. And that's an impact that you can see clearly through En-ROADS. Just wanted to share one last thing about multi-solving, and that is, this is a growth circle that is happening here in Atlanta. It's a collaboration between Climate Interactive and the Partnership for Southern Equity. And you can see that one of their goals is listed as healing environmental injustice. That would be an impactful long-term goal and one that they can achieve by using this mindset. Though multi-solving is not directly based on En-ROADS, a lot of times the mindset really helps in all kinds of cross-sectoral, getting together. A long time ago, Wendell Berry is reported to have said, to be patient in an emergency is a terrible trial. And I know that a lot of us can relate to that experience right now, but we are in the kind of emergency, this is what Elizabeth Solomon would say back to that, that requires patience. And I think this is something that CCL teaches us as well. Time is very short, and yet to make the kinds of changes we need requires trust and relationships that can't be rushed and can only be cultivated. This is slow, patient work. It's also the way that you can get to very fast and transformative change. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here today. And I'm going to turn the presentation over to Laura, who is now going to explain how carbon pricing is good for business.
Thank you, Kathy. Can everyone hear me? Good. So I'm gonna, Kathy, this was awesome. And these new features that they're offering for CCL, I think are amazing. They offer new features every month, and it takes some time to keep up with it. So that's amazing. And a lot of you are already familiar with En-ROADS. I'd say if there's a problem with En-ROADS, it's like you have to, there's so much and it's so overwhelming. So you can take it in different slices. And here is potentially a different slice you can take in highlighting the benefits of a carbon price and how you might want to talk to a business group such as the Chamber of Commerce or business people, and highlighting what's really great about carbon pricing using En-ROADS. Some of the suggestions I hope that are going to be shown here is we're going to try to keep it local, even though it's a global model, and that's a challenge. And I've got some tips here. Show market certainty with a carbon price and focus on market-driven solutions. And another interesting thing is to demonstrate policy efficiency, and I'll explain what that means. And that's less is more kind of thing. And a lot of this is based on a presentation given by Michigan CCLer Lisa Del Buono, and I put in the chat a copy of her YouTube video to watch later, but it's actually very excellent, I find. My name is Laura Iyer. I'm an Athens, Georgia business owner. I'm also an Athens CCLer and a passionate En-ROADS ambassador. Now, here's what you're familiar with. Most of you are familiar with the Global Climate Action Simulator, and I've done a couple of changes. One thing is I changed the temperature at the end of 2100 from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So if we do nothing, have baseline, we're going to end up at 6.5 degrees global warming temperature increase from pre-industrial times to 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And we need to get down to 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Another way you can use a global simulator for local decisions is you can look at the relative effectiveness of different solutions. So you could try different solutions and compare how one consortium of solutions might compare to another and which is more effective. So that's how I would use this model here. And then the 6.5 degrees that we want to get down to 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the presentation is your gauge. Is if you do this worldwide, would you even make an effect? And that kind of gives you a gut sense of yes, these are a good set of solutions, or we need to do more. The other thing that that I'd like to highlight is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we have until about 2030 to cut global emissions in half to avoid the worst consequences. So as we start to look at different policy solutions and climate solutions, we're really going to be focusing on this timeline. This is greenhouse gas net emissions. And if you look at the bottom, it goes from 2000 to the end of the century, 2100. And then the blue line is on top of a black line. The blue line is when we start to implement our solutions in the model. It's going to start to change. And we're going to kind of look at when those changes start to occur. So in an actual presentation, I would be actually bringing up inroads now, but for time's sake, I'm just going to kind of go over some things I might look at. And it's based on audience participation, of course. But three things that come up a lot in our experience is afforestation. That's growing trees, and that's a great lever to look at. Georgia is a friend of trees. We have a Georgia carbon registry since 2004. And they understand Georgia understands the importance of how trees can sequester carbon. I personally, my father is a forester in industry. My brother is a forester in industry. I have a nephew who's going into forestry. Trees are a great thing and great thing for Georgia. The second one I would look at is transportation and electrification, which is out in the media a lot and a very popular choice for addressing climate. And it's also awesome for Georgia in terms of business. We just got a great contract to build electric school buses in Fort Valley, Georgia, and their headquarters is in Macon, Georgia. And this was a great coup for us. And the third thing that seems to come up a lot is nuclear. Nuclear is a clean energy source. It does not emit CO2 in the air. And so we have two plants. We have Plant Hatch, we have Plant Vogtle, we have another one coming online, Plant Vogtle. And actually Georgia gets 20% of its electricity from nuclear right now. So that's another popular policy lever to show. In the interest of time, what I would do is I would look at each one of those policies individual. And yes, indeed, all of these make a difference. You can see that blue line start to depart from the black line. And that means that the emissions are going down. However, on each one of those cases, the temperature change, global temperature change only went down 0.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And so why is that? And you'd want to say that afforestation is a great thing. However, growing trees takes a lot of time and we have to grow a lot of trees. So I put the line in there by 2030, we don't even see a bit of change and departure from for emissions until much later, just because it takes a while to grow a tree. Same thing with electrifying our transportation. It doesn't make a big difference in the long run of where we need to be in and of itself, because if you look at 2030, we haven't really made a dent yet. The blue line doesn't really start to depart later. Why is that? Well, there's nothing in the world I would love more right now than an electric vehicle, but I have a perfectly great gas vehicle that I'm not going to get rid of just yet. And I'm probably not alone in that. Also, the infrastructure to charge these cars, we got to get that in place. So that's going to take some time to transfer that all over. So that in and of itself is not the full solution. And similarly with nuclear. Nuclear plants, as you know, take a little bit of time to build. And so again, we do not see that blue line depart from baseline until much later after 2030. So what are we going to do? Well, let's start looking at the source. Let's put a high tax or on coal, oil, and natural gas. And so these are regulatory policies that we would put in place. In addition, let's really subsidize nuclear. Let's get it going and offline. And we've started to make a bigger dent. We at 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit, that's more than 1 degree. That's a good chunk right there. And look at the blue line departing from the baseline. We have moved that way up, and that's also an awesome thing to do. And but not quite there yet. What else can we do? So let's go on to the demand side. So on the demand, we're going to start putting policies in place to increase energy efficiency and electricity in the transport and in buildings and industry. And we start to work on that demand side. We've come down quite significantly by 4.3 degrees, down to 4.3 degrees Fahrenheit. We're making some progress. And again, that blue line is departing way, way far up. And that's exactly what we want to see. However, these are 8 policies that we need to go through Congress and get regulation. And that's a lot of policies. And as CCLers, sidebar, we know that these are very difficult to get through. So is there a single policy that achieves similar results? And guess what? Yes, an economy-wide price on carbon. So if you put a carbon price on there, we can get down to 4.3 degrees. That's one policy. And I'm saying one policy like the Energy Innovation Act. Again, the way that this works, of course, as you know, is that it will put a price on carbon at the source, at the mine, at the well, at the border of our country. And the way that the Energy Innovation Act works is that we start with a very low, modest price on carbon. And what this does is this signals to the market that this price is coming, and it gives them time to get ready for this higher price. And each year we ratchet it up. So this provides market certainty, and it provides time to innovate. So if you look at this, if I just showed 2 scenarios, one with 8 policies that got us down to 4.3 degrees F, and one with 1 policy, and that was the carbon price, like the Energy Innovation Act. However, didn't we just say we need to be below 2.7 degrees F to really address climate and the worst consequences? And yes, I did. So once we have that base of that carbon price, then we start, there's a lot of market incentive. And because we're doing it for across the markets, there's a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of sharing between different market sectors in terms of energy efficiencies, in terms of electrification. We're also going to have to add some deforestation and measures to avoid that, and maybe growing some trees. Definitely, we're going to need to address methane and other. The other thing in terms of the Energy Innovation Act, the other thing that we capture is if, let's say, an industry needs to burn fossil fuels, but figures out a way to capture it and carbon capture. And again, you would get a rebate back. So that would give market incentive to really invest and look at carbon capture. And again, share that technology throughout the industries. So with that, there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's going to address climate change in total. However, a price on carbon is the most effective and efficient lever to reduce carbon emissions. And we believe it's a market incentive to spur innovation and also to carbon capture and more. So that's, in a nutshell, a way that you could potentially use En-ROADS to talk to business groups. I'm now talking to CCLers at this point, and CCLers, we encourage you all to become En-ROADS ambassadors. That's just one small sliver of a slice of how you could use this tool, but there's many, many ways to use it. And then Kathy and myself would love to talk to you about this. We love this program, and we would love more to be involved. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the speakers and the organizers. Awesome. Thank you. And this, I'll hand it back over.
Thank you, Kathy and Laura. That was fantastic. We're right up against the time we were going to start the breakout. We might have time for one question.
Yeah, we had a few posted. One of them was, can you go into more detail about the relatively low response of sea level rise to decreasing carbon emissions? And I think that question is for either Kathy or Laura.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer that. I didn't mean that it doesn't respond, but it's just that the ocean system is such a big system and there is so much heat already built into it. It's kind of like trying to turn the Titanic around. So it will eventually respond, and you can see in the graph that the further out in time we get, the more response it looks like. But it's going to continue to rise no matter what we do now, at least for, through this century and in part of the next century.
Thank you, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're going to go and do the breakout, and so Salemi will be setting that up in just a minute, and you can share your reactions and questions, not only about En-ROADS, but also Bob Inglis's presentation and your reaction to that. So I'm going to turn it over to Salemi to set up the rooms.
Are we ready?
Yep.
Here we go. Have fun.
Well, here's a comment from one group. En-ROADS, a great tool for demonstrating. The En-ROADS graphs that Kathy showed were alarming and emphasized carbon pricing. Bob Inglis' advice on approaching conservative audiences was well received. And his three options, regulation or incentives or a carbon price or tax. And that tax is the way to address climate change, where the whole world has incentive to get on board, I guess. And Bob Inglis's comment about shift from impossible to probable, but without going through possible. Thanks. Another group, my group loved Bob Inglis, who helped answer the question, what about Russia? What about China? That we sometimes hear. Another group found Inglis' presentation useful. One of my group wants to bring En-ROADS to her member of Congress.
Yeah, and we had another, Kathy, we plan to use En-ROADS more with different organizations. Yeah, I think some of them were just questions. I think that might have covered it.
Here's one, the amount of information on the En-ROADS simulation are great, with different political policies and different sources of solution to compare outcomes.
And how do we reduce energy demands? Discuss things like incentives for efficiency, taxes, and energy usage, and the possibility for more remote work. Reducing energy demand by raising energy processor fossil fuels.
There's a comment, the health work group has a presentation on E-ROADS that was prepared to share with members of Congress. It's a great resource.
Okay. Okay, we are back. And I think Henry's going to do this introduction, right? You there, Henry? There he is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I got distracted. So I'm here to introduce Dr. Marilyn Brown, who's the interim chair of the School of Public Policy at Georgia Tech, Regents and Brooke Byers Professor of Sustainable System, and a founding partner of Drawdown Georgia, and a great presenter about this exciting thing that Georgia is unique, and we have the chance to actually use what's different about Georgia to draw down our own emissions very quickly and easily. So I won't say any more except Marilyn, see if you can share your screen and take it away.
All right, I'll try to repeat the steps I did when I practiced this. It seemed to work.
Yeah.
All right.
Green button at the bottom, and
yeah,
buttons on your own.
Why did it go to launch meeting? Let's see. All right. All right. Here. And I think I'm making my way. Slideshow. Play from. So are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Oh,
we see it. What a beautiful thing.
Okay. Thank you. Blue sky. It's what it looks like out there today. So great to be here. Henry, you didn't tell me what a fantastic program you had lined up. I'm very intimidated coming behind Danny Richter, Bob Inglis, Kathy Cullen, Laura Iyer, all those great presentations and more. So I'm a fan of the Citizens Climate Lobby. I have been for a long time, and I'm really pleased to be here to share progress report on Drawdown Georgia. So I'll talk for maybe 10, 15 minutes and then have another equivalent amount of time for Q&A if that works.
That'd be great. And everyone, if you have a question that comes up as she's presenting, go ahead and drop it in the chat so we can get to it.
All right. So Drawdown Georgia is a statewide initiative to identify and scale promising climate solutions for Georgia in ways that advance equity, that help grow the economy, that improve public health, and that also nurtures the larger environment. So when we started this activity, we looked around for where was the roadmap? Aren't there roadmaps for local communities and states and counties and metros to identify what their best bets are in tackling the climate crisis? We found a great absence. Plenty of documentation if you want to take a global view of priorities or a US view, but not so much at state levels, certainly not in Georgia. There are 22 states in the US that have climate goals. Georgia is not one of them. And so there isn't really state leadership. There's no guide to what should be done. No priorities have been set by our legislature or the State House. So we set about developing a methodology and then an attempt to begin activation. The first year of our effort was the methodology applied to identify high priority solutions for Georgia. We asked 6 questions of 100 possible global solutions that have been proposed in the Project Drawdown, which is a global effort that's been going on for about a decade. We asked if each of these 100 global solutions were relevant to Georgia. For instance, tropical rainforest, we could eliminate that immediately. We asked if the technology was market ready, and so perhaps tidal energy is not so ready off the coast of Georgia today. Is there enough local experience and available data? Wind dropped out. It's not going to be here off the coast of Georgia for the next decade, but maybe after that. Can the solution deliver 1 million metric tons of annual reduction or uptake? Now that number came about because Georgia has a carbon equivalent footprint of a little over 100 million metric tons a year. And we didn't want to bother with small solutions that would be less than 1% of that. Then, of course, is it cost competitive with other solutions? And finally, are there any significant beyond carbon impacts that would cause us to not want to proceed? Are there workforce diversity issues? Are there maybe other environmental considerations, other types of waste streams or impacts that we would not want to have to tackle? The results of this and other results I'm going to be talking to you about today have been published in open access articles. We paid, maybe you aren't familiar with these costs, $4,000 or $5,000 for each article that we've published recently, so that you all can access it. And there's the first one if you wanted to learn more about that filtering process. The result of our drawdown selection are these 20 high impact solutions that cross 5 sectors: electricity and transportation, the 2 biggest emission sectors in the state, food and ag, buildings and materials, which includes manufacturing of materials, and land sinks, which include both forests and coastal wetlands. So here you'll see kind of something for everyone, I hope. Lots of these solutions are in the hands of consumers, for instance, composting and recycling, electric cars and rooftop solar. These are things that we all can do. And some things are in the hands of business. So combined heat and power might be an example of that. Retrofitting buildings, especially commercial office buildings. And other things are in the hands of government because a considerable amount of investment might be needed, such as mass transit, or maybe the recharging infrastructure of EVs. So lots of need to engage many stakeholders to make progress through these 20 solutions. Now, we've done our own kind of pseudo inroads analysis, not nearly the elaborate process that you just saw, but we've done the calculations for Georgia. We've gone back in time to the year 2005, which is the baseline for the Paris Agreement, when Georgia had a carbon footprint, net carbon footprint of 156 million tons of CO2. So here we're giving credit to this forest. You can see the band of gray there, the carbon sinks that have been quite constant at about 46 million tons of uptake each year. And then we layer on what we consider the achievable amount of each of these 20 solutions that we think could penetrate the marketplace under very likely future policies and business and consumer preferences. There's no carbon tax in this. This is all lighter types of policies. The putting what did Bob Inglis say? A little bit of sugar to help the medicine go down, that sort of thing. And we arrive at an achievable 2030 carbon footprint of 49, a reduction of 49 down to 128 million tons of, let me see, so I can't see my slide because it's covered up by pictures of people. I should know these numbers by heart. Okay, so 79 million metric tons of CO2 net emissions in 2030 could be achieved with a reasonable focus on these 20 solutions. And you can see that impacts are across all 5 sectors of the economy. So now I want to talk about, for a moment, this is my Henry Slack slide. He said, can't you say something about carbon taxing? And of course, I've spent probably 20 years looking at global US regional carbon taxes. So I have at my disposal, and so to draw down Georgia, the use of the National Energy Modeling System, which I applied a $15 tax to, along with 12, 10, and 7, as you can see here, to compare the amount of clean electricity that would result under a clean electricity performance plan, or I've seen that perhaps it's also called, Danny Richter called it the clean electricity payment plan. So both of those terms are being used, but this is an electric sector analysis. What if you put a tax on CO2 from electricity and you apply the CEPP payment and penalty program? How would the Southeast, CERC Southeast region, which is essentially the Southern company territory, respond, and what would it cost? So if you look at the top line, this is the clean share percentage of electricity in the CERC Southeast or Southern company that would occur under a $15 tax introduced in the year 2022 with a 5% increase every year. What you see here is a significant uptake in that region of clean share. Clean share by definition includes nuclear, solar, hydro, as well as wind and geothermal, but we don't have any wind or geothermal in the CERC Southeast region. So all of this clean share is nuclear, which is the dominant, solar, and hydro. But significant gain of renewables occurs immediately with the announcement of a tax. And we would receive more payments in this region than we would penalties. The net gain is 78 million to the electricity. It goes supposed to go to the suppliers of electricity to be spent in ways that benefit their consumers, their customers. Now, if you don't tax at $15, but instead go to a lower level of taxation, 12, 10, 7.5, or 5, you pay more penalties than you do get derived from grants or payments. So $15 seems to be the sweet spot, at least in the CERC Southeast. Now, when I get off the phone, I'm going to get my team looking at the whole US. But I suspect from my work in other studies that the same will be true, that we can significantly boost clean share at a rate, and it's a complicated payment calculation. I won't bother you with it, but it's all kinds of ifs, thins, and buts associated. So that's my Henry Slack slide. And of course, I should say, my history of looking at these taxes is if you do a tax and dividend, a fee and dividend, bills do not rise for households across Georgia. So now a year ago, or not quite, we had our 20 solutions identified. Then we began our phase 2, which is focus on activation and more detailed work on these 20 solutions. So the first task I want to talk with you about that we're currently involved with is tracking the greenhouse gas footprint of individual counties and metro areas in the state of Georgia. So here you see the rationale, which is you can't manage what you can't measure, and metrics motivate action. We're hoping to achieve kind of a competitive Georgia going forward. We're going to map and visualize how everyone's doing every month. Every month, this gets adjusted up or down, depending on actions taken in counties across the state. And we want to aim this at the generally interested business citizen or maybe a middle schooler, but you hopefully eventually will have this data access available for researchers, analysts, and decision makers. So we are using Power BI, a very nice tool to visualize. This is a graph that's, I should have a big draft over it. So these numbers should not be taken too seriously, but they're probably not too far off. Emissions by sector, emissions across the counties, and by including forestry and ag totals over time. And if I were really good, I could go to the Power BI, open it up, and put my cursor on every one of these counties and get some more, do a deep dive of information. So we're really excited. I do something like this. I go over to Savannah and look at what's happening there. Where are their emissions? How have they trended? And what are the components making the biggest difference in that county? So that's our tracking, our geospatial tracking. We're going to be releasing that tool at the end of December. That's a calendar year 21 deliverable. Now, second task, equally exciting, engaging business in Drawdown, Georgia, and creating a Georgia Climate Compact to be joined by businesses in Georgia. And this is motivated by evidence that, you know, we've got to get the business community involved. They're going to be the greatest value to achieving drawdown goals. So we need to be able to provide data and facilitation and get an exchange, get a club-like kind of atmosphere amongst businesses across Georgia, and offer technical expertise through the many universities that are part of Drawdown, Georgia. Value proposition here is that a commitment to drawing down emissions will realize benefits. It'll help engage employees. You'll be able to access experts in the university and our allies working with us. There's an enhanced brand recognition that occurs with this commitment, help you mitigate costs and share risks. And maybe most importantly, identify innovative prospects. What are other businesses doing? And crowdsourcing solutions. What are other people doing? So we have commitments. This shows 12 of our founding partners to the Georgia Compact. It's going to be announced on the 21st of October, not that far away. We also have UPS, and hopefully by October 21st, this list will be even longer, but it's pretty powerful the way it is. Some environmentally oriented companies, but also some really large multinationals as well. Third task is to evaluate, plan, activate, and track solutions. And this has involved a number of activities, including a public survey of Georgia residents that just finished a week ago. 1,800 surveys have come back on Qualtrics, and we're in the midst of looking at those. I'll give you a little more on that in a minute. We're tracking and evaluating solution activation through some of the same geospatial mapping, but also other data analytics. And we're developing plans for individual high impact solutions. You can hear about this at a seminar at Georgia Tech. If anyone's interested, I've got my email at the end. I'll send you a link. 3 graduate students are going to talk about research to action, ways to scale climate solutions in Georgia. And they're going to tackle rooftop solar, demand response, and combined heat and power. We're going to have 3 academic discussants and 3 business discussants talking about their views of what these grad students have concluded from their published research. I'm very excited. This, getting students in has been so impactful. And we'll be launching a carbon reduction game that will be used by the Institute for Georgia Environmental Leaders at their January meeting in North Georgia. Here's an example of mapping solutions, individual, in this case, we're tracking EV ownership and the availability of charging stations. And one of the immediate conclusions from this geospatial mapping is that charging stations are close to highways, rural highways here, for instance, and in cities, and within cities, they are in the affluent neighborhoods. So we have a rural-urban divide. You can only, if you're in the rural sections, find it charging if you're on a highway. If you're in a city, you're best off if you're in a prosperous portion of town. So these are some of the issues we're tackling. This is about my last slide, maybe one concluding after this. We have a lot of students we've pulled in from Emory, UGA. The survey I just mentioned is being done in conjunction with political scientist Corey Struthers at UGA and Georgia State, as well as all of the universities that are part of the Georgia Climate Project. There are 9 of them. And from those universities, we have an enormous graduate and undergraduate pool of resources. In the class I taught last spring, I had 75 students, 50 of them graduate students from all across campus, wrote papers, and they were so fantastic. They gave videos on their papers. I videotaped them, and you can find them here. These are hot links to those videotapes. They're supposed to be no more than 20 minutes long, and you'll see wonderful insights from these students about these solutions. And then on the right side is a little bit more on the Georgia Public Survey. We're not only asking, this project is about solutions. You'll find a lot of evidence that we're making progress on solutions in these videos. Evidence of investments. I just heard, it's so great to hear Laura about the investment in electric school bus manufacturing. That's the sort of thing we're trying to keep tabs of in these areas. But we're also looking at views of policies. So we have asked our citizens, would you would you yourself engage in a pay-as-you-save program or take an EV rebate? Do you think the state should give an EV rebate? Do you think the state should have climate goals? So I look forward to sharing the results of those surveys soon. Now, I wanted to end by saying that, success can't be achieved alone by any one organization or project. As much as I'd like to think universities and students can do it all, we're just the tip of the iceberg. We need everyone. We need every corner of the state to be engaged, and we need all of Georgia's society, all the socio-demographics. So these are ways that you can stay in touch. There's my email address and the project drawdown website there, which has an enormous amount of resources, as well as our research portal, which is the last website there on that list. So thank you very much for all you're doing and for giving me the pleasure of interacting with you today.
And you have time for questions, right?
Of course.
Well, wonderful. I think we had a few show up in the chat. I also want to just say, for those who don't know, they are standing at the Candida building.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want us to be, and we're not.
I wanted to welcome you there. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, well, I really wanted to be there. Let's flatten the curve so we can be there next year. God willing, the creek don't rise.
Yep.
So, can our chat masters read some questions?
Yes, yeah. So Dr. Brown, Emily asked, so what level of awareness of Drawdown Georgia do you have among state local leaders?
We have probably a very inadequate level of recognition of this activity by policymakers. We are starting to reach out to the departments across the state with a review of our dashboard. Yep. So we've got 4 or 5 agencies that have been invited to be engaged with that review. That will get them involved. We have not briefed, we've had a few briefings with legislators, but not many, and certainly have never been invited to speak with the governor or the governor's staff. Would love to. We'd love to do all of that. We do have our hands full with our research, but still, and there's no excuse. We're citizens and we want to make a difference. So yeah, if you have advice, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for asking. Good question.
Dr. Brown, does the impact of the tax you evaluated include an annual increase?
It does. A 5% increase beginning in the first year, after the first year, every year.
And Dr. Brown, some guy named Henry said he'd love to hear more about how the bills will not rise with the carbon tax. Is that because the utilities will move to solar and nuclear?
No, the idea is that the revenues are recycled back to the household sector. And so the rise in rates that would occur are offset by the dividends that go back to households. You know, I thought this was how it was supposed to be, although now I'm hearing that maybe those taxes are going to be used to offset other investments by the government. So I don't know, but if they were to be recycled, household bills would not rise.
Okay.
Another question by Ken is, if we reach out to business, how do we connect them with Drawdown Georgia?
You connect them, always this www.drawdownga.org is a great place. You can send a message there and it gets filtered. But also you can contact me, or Beryl Toktai is the director of the Racy Anderson Center for Sustainable Business in the Scheller College at Georgia Tech. Her last name is Toktai, Toktai. Beryl, B-E-R-I-L. She's got a whole team that's working the carbon compact for Georgia, and would love to hear if there's someone out there that wants to join. The admissions it's free. They're being very, very, you've got to commit to some principles, but yeah, and there is a bit of a contract, but it's, we're not putting businesses online that they must deliver 50% reduction and by 2030 or anything like that, although significant goals are encouraged.
Yeah, Jeff asked about that, along the vein of metrics causes action, anything about commercial properties reporting energy usage. Understand that that's been very positive in terms of reduction in New York City. And do you think that might work in Atlanta too?
I think it is working. It should be working. We have the same benchmarking requirements for buildings in the city of Atlanta. And so there ought to be now a much more efficient marketplace, because there's more information readily available about commercial buildings, is my understanding. Yeah, we need better data. We've got some Zillow data, I'm excited to say, that we're going to be looking. One of our pet projects is solutions, or I should use our terminology. High impact solution is retrofitting. Within that, heat pumps are one of my favorite technologies. And we have Zillow data on building by building across Georgia. So we'll be looking at that.
Are you, Wayne asked if you're planning to network businesses through the BBB, Better Business Bureau?
I don't think that's come up, but that sounds like an important step. Thank you. How do you think I should go about doing that? Oh, you mean just see if they're good citizens?
Right.
Oh, yeah. That's a great idea. Yep.
And Terry asked about, how do we provide positive feedback to companies that are partnering with Drawdown Georgia?
How to provide positive feedback, to encourage them or to
Express our support.
Yeah,
they're doing.
I don't know, but we're launching this in a month. There's still time for us to get something out there, kind of a crowdsource thank you idea, something like that. Maybe we could put something together. We got these smart IT guys, gals, how to enable thank yous. Great thought. Thank you.
And CCL can send out to their members, because we have some people who may work for UPS or Intercept or other companies to be able to give that thanks directly.
Yeah, that's a low cost, high impact idea. Thank you. Well, stay in touch and keep up the good work. I'm so glad that I was able to participate today. And thanks for all those good questions. Henry, back to you.
Well, and I'll actually put it back to Terry and Ken, I think, who are, Ken Kirby has been managing our slides. And so Terry, take it away.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Brown. That was wonderful. Great to hear it. So we're going to have our last breakout session of the day, and it's the same method. We're going to talk a few minutes among ourselves about what we've heard and what additional questions have come up. And Salemi will do the honors, I think.
You guys ready? Here we go.
We're back.
We are. Okay. Who is working on doing the readout here?
We can have people share since we don't have too much time, but we would like to hear from you guys.
Yeah, I hope sharing will go into the chat. And meanwhile, Laura's noted in the chat that you can send a message with your next climate action. And we'll see those in Poll EV in a minute. But meanwhile, who's our readers?
It's Laura and Bob.
Okay, go ahead, Bob. You have it? People in our group thought it was a good idea to give inroads presentations to our members of Congress and staff.
Oh, unmute myself. Drawdown Georgia is great, and this is by Katie and her group, because it is homegrown. These are institutions that have high local credibility, especially in a political apparatus that might be more resistance than other states. It's also useful to see how these solutions can benefit the local community economically, public health, etc.
Scott wrote, good to see the business community getting engaged and stepping up.
And, I think that's what we had so far.
Okay.
Can I share my screen and show you what you guys are saying?
Yeah.
So these are our next actions. Let's see, Jeff writes, redouble our efforts that CCL has us doing right now. We are getting close. I like, bless your heart at meetings.
Actually, that was Bless Your Heart, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It was Bob Inglis inspired someone.
Yeah.
I won't say who that was.
Okay.
Great. Restart tabling. Start emailing presidents, mayors, inroads presentation, rejoice, getting close, contact Congress, business outreach, send feedback to businesses, engage with Congress, text, talk to your neighbors, write. Good stuff. Big one, contact Congress. That's what we're loving.
All right, I'm going to go back to the share, and Terry, you can.
And just for as a plug for the monthly call-in campaign,
Oh,
people can do as well. That'd be one way. And allows CCL to track it as well.
Was that all the questions?
Join.
We actually have a little, we're actually way back on schedule.
Nice. Join a phone bank. Yeah, I think the questions have kind of.
Okay. All right. So we're about ready to close the official conference anyway. And Ken, I think there's a thank you slide.
yes.
So, so let me at the beginning thank the conference organization team. So I just want to echo what a great team to work with. And some of you may remember that our original plan for this, not only were we going to meet at the Condata building down at Georgia Tech campus, but we were going to have a 2-day conference instead of one. We decided that organizing 2 days of Zoom meetings was probably beyond us with the time that we had left. So we pared it down to 1 day. But we still have a list of things that we wanted to do on that Sunday that we're going to be scheduling in the future. So be on the lookout for that. We may do several in one workshop or spread them out over several weeks. That remains to be seen. And when we officially close the conference, we're going to keep this Zoom room open for a little bit. If people want to stay and just hang out, our plan was to maybe create breakout rooms like we've been doing so people could talk in small groups. Depends on how many people stay. So you're welcome to do that. And I just want to express my general gratitude for everybody who joined this conference today. I'm looking out my window and I can see it's a beautiful day, and I'm hopeful to get out to enjoy some of it a little later this afternoon. But just don't want to underestimate the commitment you all make by being here and listening and being engaged. After listening to Bob Inglis again, I've heard him many times, and I was thinking of the phrase "a miracle of active engagement," and you know, you all showed your engagement by being here, and then you also showed it by your questions and remarks and you know, staying with the process. I didn't see the attendees start to go down until actually right now when I started talking, but I won't take that personally. Yeah, so Yeah, so I'm almost at a loss of words for expressing that gratitude. But one thing that comes to me is that we're working on a really important problem, and I think that once we all realize that, we kind of that helps us stick to it. But I guess what I want to leave you with is that even if we don't solve this climate crisis, maybe somebody else will. Some of us won't be around to see the solution. If we don't solve it, we will still have met and worked with the best people, and that means a lot to me.
Thank you, Terry. I second that, and we're going to solve it.